I never thought betrayal could come from the two people I trusted most. It was a quiet evening when my son walked in, his shoulders slumped, eyes brimming with tears. "She cheated, Mom," he whispered, and my heart shattered alongside his. But it wasn't just her. His best friend had been the one to betray him. In that moment, I knew our lives would never be the same again. Josh was always the strong one, my son with the brightest smile and an even brighter future. At 23, he was in love with Sarah, a woman who seemed perfect for him, kind, ambitious, and charming. They had been together for 3 years, and he was ready to propose. His best friend, Mark, had been by his side since childhood, practically a brother. Our family dinners were filled with laughter and plans for the future. I had always seen Josh as unshakable. He was the kind of person others leaned on, the steady presence in a chaotic world. He and Sarah seemed like the ideal couple, always finishing each other's sentences, sharing inside jokes, and dreaming of a life together. I'd hear them giggling in the living room, plotting vacations and whispering about the house they wanted to buy. And then, in one cruel moment, it all fell apart. The night Josh walked through the door with red-rimmed eyes, his pain was almost unbearable to witness. He collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. "Mom," he choked out. "I can't believe it. Sarah and Mark, they—" His voice broke, and I felt my heart twist in my chest. I wanted to fix it for him, to erase the pain and betrayal, but I knew this wasn't something I could solve. Instead, I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Josh," I said softly, "you don't have to go through this alone." For days, he barely spoke. The weight of losing not just the love of his life, but also the friend he trusted most was crushing. He would sit in his room, staring at the walls, and I would peek in, wondering if he needed space or support. I tried everything to remind him of who he was, a man who deserved loyalty and respect. I cooked his favorite meals, brought him tea, and listened without judgment. When he needed silence, I sat nearby, offering quiet companionship. Josh was a shadow of himself, but I knew this wasn't the end of his story. Somewhere inside him was the strong, kind, and hopeful man I'd always admired. It was my mission to help him find his way back. As the days passed, the silence in our house grew heavier. Josh wasn't the same. His usual warmth was replaced by a guarded, hollow demeanor. I could see the toll it took on him. The betrayal wasn't just an event. It was a storm that lingered, darkening every aspect of his life. I began to notice small changes in his behavior. He avoided checking his phone, no longer scrolling through photos or messages with Sarah. When his old friends called, he hesitated before answering, sometimes letting the calls go to voicemail. He didn't talk about Mark anymore, not even to vent. It was as if he were trying to erase both of them from his life, but their absence left a gaping void. One evening, as I folded laundry, Josh walked into the room, his expression clouded with something I couldn't place. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "why do people hurt the ones they claim to love?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes," I began cautiously, "it's not about you. It's about their own flaws, their own struggles." "But Mark was my best friend," he interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "How could he do this? He knew everything, my plans, how much Sarah meant to me. He still went behind my back." His words hung in the air, and I felt his pain as if it were my own. He was questioning everything, not just their betrayal, but his own judgment. Had he trusted the wrong people? Was he too blind to see the signs? Over the next few weeks, I watched Josh wrestle with his emotions. He would go to the gym more frequently, pushing himself to exhaustion as if the physical strain could distract him from his thoughts. He'd sit outside late into the night, staring at the stars with a drink in hand. his expression distant. But there were moments, too, when I saw sparks of his old self. Once, as we were having dinner, he cracked a small joke about the overly spicy food I'd made. It wasn't much, but it was something. I latched onto those moments, hoping they signaled a slow return to the man I knew. Still, the tension was palpable. I noticed how he would occasionally glance at his phone with a look of hesitation. Was he tempted to reach out to Sarah? Or Mark? Did he want answers, closure, or just an outlet for his anger? One night, I found him in the living room, scrolling through old photos on his laptop. Pictures of him and Sarah at the beach, laughing as the wind tousled their hair. Images of him and Mark, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning like brothers. His face was unreadable, but I could sense the storm brewing inside him. "Do you think people can change, Mom?" he asked, not looking up. "I think people can," I replied, sitting beside him. "But it doesn't mean they always will. And it doesn't mean you have to forgive them." He nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "It's hard to let go," he admitted. "Of the good memories. Of the person you thought they were." His words stayed with me. Josh wasn't just grieving the betrayal. He was grieving the loss of trust, the loss of the life he'd envisioned. Every small reminder, a song, a place, a memory, seemed to cut him anew, yet he didn't want to let go. It was as if letting go meant admitting it was truly over. The tension in our home lingered, a quiet undercurrent that neither of us could fully escape. But I knew this wasn't the end. Josh was on the brink of something, whether it was healing or confrontation. All I could do was be there, steady and unwavering, as he figured out what came next. It started subtly, small gestures that carried unexpected weight. At first, I thought it was just Josh's way of expressing gratitude for my support during his heartbreak. He began paying more attention to me in ways that were both touching and surprising. When I mentioned feeling tired, he'd brew my favorite tea without a word. If I seemed stressed, he'd suggest watching a classic movie we both loved, wrapping me in a blanket as if shielding me from the world. One evening, I noticed him watching me from across the dinner table, his gaze lingering a moment longer than usual. "What?" I asked, half laughing, self-conscious under his scrutiny. "Nothing," he said with a small smile. "It's just, you've always done so much for me. I don't think I've ever properly thanked you." "Josh, you don't need to thank me. I'm your mom. It's what I do." "But it's more than that," he insisted, his tone soft but firm. "You've always been my anchor, no matter what. I don't know how I'd have gotten through this without you." His words stirred something in me, a mix of pride, gratitude, and something I couldn't quite name. I brushed it off as maternal affection, but the feeling lingered. The dynamic between us began to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. One morning, I came downstairs to find the kitchen filled with the smell of pancakes and fresh coffee. Josh stood at the stove, his shoulders broad, his movements confident. "Morning, beautiful," he said, his voice light but warm. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. "What did you just call me?" I asked with a nervous laugh. He turned, his hazel eyes meeting mine. "Beautiful," he repeated casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You deserve to hear it." My cheeks warmed, and I busied myself with setting the table, trying to shake the fluttering feeling in my chest. But his words stayed with me, resonating in a way I hadn't anticipated. As the weeks went on, Josh's attentiveness only grew. He started noticing the little things, when I'd had a long day, when I seemed lost in thought. One evening, after I mentioned my back aching, he offered to give me a massage. I hesitated, but his sincerity won me over. As his hands worked the tension from my shoulders, I couldn't help but notice how strong and gentle his touch was. "There," he said after a while, his voice low and soothing. Feel better? Much, I admitted, though my heart was racing for reasons I couldn't explain. Then came the night we went for a walk. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and Josh offered me his arm as we strolled through the neighborhood. I laughed at the gesture, but there was something undeniably charming about it. Such a gentleman, I teased. Always, he replied with a wink, his smile making my chest tighten. The tension between us was unspoken but palpable, an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was just the closeness of our bond, the result of weathering a storm together. But there were moments, fleeting, charged moments, when I caught him looking at me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find a note beside my breakfast plate. "Good morning, beautiful. Enjoy your meal." The words were simple, but they felt deliberate, personal. My heart skipped a beat, and I found myself smiling despite myself. Later that day, Josh surprised me with a gift, a set of art supplies. "You used to love painting," he said, his tone soft but earnest. "I think you should start again." The thoughtfulness of the gesture overwhelmed me. As I opened the box and ran my fingers over the brushes and paints, I felt a long dormant part of me stir to life. "Josh, I don't even know what to say," I whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his hazel eyes meeting mine. "I just want you to be happy." His words settled in my chest, warm and heavy. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not just as a mother, but as a person. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. I told myself it was just gratitude, a reflection of the bond we shared. But as the days turned into weeks, that explanation felt less and less convincing. I couldn't deny the shift between us. It was in the way his hand lingered a moment longer when he passed me something, the way his laughter filled the house with a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It was in the way my heart raced when our gazes met, in the way his touch seemed to ignite something deep within me. I tried to dismiss it, to convince myself it was nothing. But the truth was undeniable. Something had changed. Something I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I tried. The shift between us had been slow, almost imperceptible, but it had grown into something neither of us could ignore. There were moments when I caught myself looking at Josh and feeling things I couldn't explain, things I shouldn't feel. I told myself it was just the emotional aftermath of everything we'd been through together. But as time went on, the line between what was appropriate and what wasn't began to blur. It all came to a head one evening. I had been painting in the studio Josh had set up for me, completely engrossed in the strokes of color blending across the canvas. The room was filled with the faint scent of fresh paint, and the soft hum of jazz music played in the background. A playlist Josh had made for me. "Mom?" His voice broke the quiet, and I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression hesitant but warm. "Yes, honey?" I said, setting my brush down and wiping my hands on a cloth. He stepped inside, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I thought you might need a break," he said, handing me one. "Thank you." "I too, thank you." I took a sip, grateful for the warmth. "You always know exactly what I need." Josh smiled, but there was something in his gaze, something that made my pulse quicken. "You look happy when you paint," he said, his voice softer now. "I haven't seen you like this in a long time." I felt a flush rise to my cheeks. "It's because of you," I admitted. "You've brought so much light back into my life, Josh. I don't think I can ever thank you enough for that." He moved closer, setting his mug down on the table beside me. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his tone deep and steady. "I just want to see you happy." For a moment, the air between us felt heavy, charged. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch lingered, and I felt my breath hitch. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his eyes locking with mine. "Josh," I started, my voice trembling, but I didn't know how to finish. The emotions swirling inside me were too overwhelming, too complex. Before I could think, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was soft, tentative, as if he were testing the waters. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I froze, torn between the instinct to pull away and the undeniable pull I felt toward him. When he pulled back, his hazel eyes searched mine. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have—" But before he could finish, I reached up and cupped his face in my hands. "Josh," I said, my voice firm but gentle. This is complicated." "I know," he admitted, his hands resting lightly on my waist. "But I can't ignore how I feel. You've always been there for me, Mom. You've shown me what love is, real love. And I think I've fallen in love with you." His words sent a shockwave through me. Part of me wanted to reject them, to tell him this was wrong, that it was just the result of everything we'd been through. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger with every lingering glance, every gentle touch, couldn't deny that I felt something too. "Josh," I began, my voice trembling. "What we're feeling, it's not something we can act on." "Why not?" he asked, his tone earnest. "Love is love, isn't it? You've taught me that. You've shown me that it's about connection, about trust and care, and I feel all of that with you." I didn't know what to say. My mind raced with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The boundaries we'd always known felt like they had dissolved, leaving us in uncharted territory. As if sensing my hesitation, Josh stepped back slightly, giving me space. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I needed you to know how I feel." His vulnerability brought tears to my eyes. "Josh, I care about you more than I can put into words. But this is so much bigger than just us. There are so many things to consider." He nodded, his expression somber but understanding. "I know it's complicated, but I also know that I've never felt this way before. Not with Sarah, not with anyone." The weight of his words pressed down on me, and I felt tears slip down my cheeks. "This is so confusing," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't know what to do." Josh reached out, gently wiping a tear from my face. "You don't have to do anything right now," he said. "Just let yourself feel. That's all I'm asking." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I retreated to my room, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't untangle. I replayed the moment in the studio over and over, questioning everything. Was this just a result of the emotional bond we'd built during his heartbreak? Or was it something deeper? Something neither of us had been prepared for? The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry if I made things harder for you. I just needed to be honest. I'll give you as much space as you need. I love you." His words both comforted and unsettled me. I knew we couldn't go back to the way things were, but I also didn't know how to move forward. The lines between us had been blurred, and there was no easy way to redraw them. As I stood there, holding the note, I realized one thing. No matter how complicated or unconventional our situation had become, the love we shared was real. And that love, however messy or confusing, was the foundation we would have to navigate this uncharted territory. The days following Josh's confession were some of the most emotionally turbulent I had ever experienced. The air between us was charged with unspoken words, every interaction layered with an awareness we couldn't ignore. I found myself replaying the moment in the studio, questioning not only his feelings but my own. Could I really dismiss what had passed between us as a fleeting reaction to a shared hardship? Or was it something deeper? Josh respected my need for space, retreating to his room or the gym for hours at a time. But even in his absence, I could feel the weight of his presence in the house. Every corner held memories of our bond. Every glance reminded me of the warmth in his eyes, the sincerity in his words. The walls seemed to whisper the truth I wasn't ready to face. Something between us had irrevocably changed. One evening, I came downstairs to find him sitting in the living room, staring at the blank screen of the television. He looked up when I entered, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant. "I don't want to make things harder for you. If you want me to leave, I will." His words struck me like a blow. The thought of him leaving, of creating distance between us, felt unbearable. "No," I said quickly, my voice firmer than I expected. "I don't want that." Relief flashed across his face, but it was quickly tempered by caution. I don't want to hurt you," he said softly. "Or ruin what we have." "What we have?" I echoed, sitting down across from him. "Josh, what we have is complicated. It's not something most people would understand." "I don't care what people think," he said, his tone suddenly more resolute. "I care about you. About us. That's all that matters to me." His conviction was both comforting and terrifying. It reminded me of the Josh I'd raised, steadfast, loyal, unafraid to stand up for what he believed in. But this wasn't a situation I could navigate with pure emotion. There were boundaries, societal norms, and my own internal conflict to contend with. Despite our efforts to move forward cautiously, the tension between us became impossible to ignore. Every shared meal, every quiet moment in the house, felt like a dance around the truth. And then, one night, everything came to a head. We were sitting on the couch, a classic movie playing in the background, though neither of us was paying attention. Josh turned to me, his expression serious. "Mom, I can't keep pretending nothing's changed. I feel it every time I'm around you. Don't you?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. "Josh, this isn't something we can just dive into. It's too complicated." "I know it is," he said, his voice steady. "But that doesn't mean we can ignore it." Before I could respond, he reached out and took my hand in his. The gesture was simple, but the warmth of his touch sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Not as my mom, and not as whatever this is." Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at him, seeing both the boy I had raised and the man he had become. "You'll never lose me," I whispered. "But we need to figure this out. Together." From that point on, we began to navigate the uncharted waters of our relationship with cautious honesty. We agreed to take things one day at a time, to prioritize communication and respect above all else. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of guilt. But there were also moments of undeniable connection, moments that reminded me why this journey was worth taking. Still, the world outside our walls loomed large. What would people think if they knew? How would they judge us? These questions hung over me like a shadow, and I knew they weighed on Josh as well. But for now, we chose to focus on the bond we shared, the love that had grown between us in the most unexpected of ways. The fallout from our decision wasn't just external, it was internal too. I grappled with my identity as a mother, questioning what this new dynamic meant for our roles. Josh struggled with his own feelings of guilt, wondering if he was asking too much of me. But through it all, we leaned on each other, finding solace in the connection we had built. One evening, as we sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Josh turned to me with a faint smile. "No matter what happens," he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve, "I'm glad we've been honest with each other. I don't regret anything." I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his. "Neither do I," admitted, my voice steady. "But we have to be careful. This isn't just about us. It's about everything we've built, everything we've been through." He nodded, his grip on my hand tightening. "I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure we figure this out. Together." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, fear, joy, and guilt all colliding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Josh and I had decided to take things slowly, to let our connection unfold naturally without forcing anything. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was one we could live with. More importantly, it was a choice that honored the bond we'd built, even as we navigated its complexities. In those quiet moments together, I found myself reflecting on how we'd come to this point. It wasn't just the betrayal Josh had faced or the emotional turmoil it had unleashed. It was the way we'd leaned on each other, the way we'd found strength in our shared vulnerability. The love between us had always been there, steady and unconditional. But now, it had evolved into something neither of us had expected. One evening, as I worked on a new painting in the studio Josh had set up for me, he walked in carrying 2 cups of tea. "You're getting better with every piece," he said, setting 1 cup down beside me. "This one feels peaceful." I looked at the canvas, a swirl of soft blues and golds blending into a serene landscape. "I think that's because I finally feel peaceful," I admitted, glancing up at him. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Josh smiled, his hazel eyes warm and steady. "I'm glad," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You deserve to feel that way." His words stayed with me long after he'd left the room. They reminded me of the journey we'd been on together, the heartbreak, the healing, and the unexpected connection that had emerged from it all. It wasn't a journey I would have chosen, but it was one I couldn't regret. As time went on, I began to notice the subtle ways our dynamic shifted. Josh's gestures of care and thoughtfulness became second nature, and I found myself doing the same for him. It was as if we'd discovered a new way of being, one that was grounded in mutual respect and an unwavering commitment to each other's happiness. But there were challenges, too. We knew that the world outside our home wouldn't understand what we'd built, and we struggled with the fear of judgment. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if we were making the right choice, if we were risking too much for something that might not last. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the love we shared, a love that had been tested and had only grown stronger. One morning, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sun rise over the horizon, Josh turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, "do you think people will ever understand us?" I considered his question for a moment before answering. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I've realized that understanding isn't the most important thing. What matters is that we understand each other, that we're honest and kind, and that we always choose love over fear." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'm not afraid anymore," he said. "As long as we have each other, I know we can handle anything." His words filled me with a quiet sense of resolve. The path we'd chosen wasn't easy, but it was ours. And in the end, that was all that mattered. As I leaned back in my chair, the warmth of the morning sun on my face, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Josh, but for the journey that had brought us here. It had been messy and painful and complicated, but it had also been beautiful. It had taught me that love, in all its forms, is worth fighting for. It had reminded me that even in the face of heartbreak, there is always hope. And as I looked over at Josh, his profile illuminated by the golden light of dawn, I knew that our story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. If you were in their shoes, how would you handle this complicated love story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more gripping, emotional stories that dive into the complexities of love, betrayal, and redemption. Stay tuned. Our next story will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.